Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak in favour of Bill C-55, an act to amend the Oceans Act and the Canada Petroleum Resources Act, and offer a few suggestions on how the bill could be improved. Let me say at the onset that I share the government's commitment to the international community to protect 5% of Canada's marine areas by 2017 and 10% by 2020, with the aim to halt the destruction of marine ecosystems to protect our oceans. However, since signing the 1992 Convention on Biological Diversity, consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments have failed to take meaningful action to make good on this international commitment. In terms of protecting marine areas, until very recently, Canada lagged behind China at 1.6% and is still behind Japan at 5.6%. Australia and the United States are much further ahead, with 33.2% and 30.4% of their oceans protected, respectively. This bill provides some much-needed new legal tools to speed up the creation of marine protected areas, but it falls far short of Canada's international commitments to protect our marine biodiversity. While it has been encouraging to watch repeated announcements this past year of new marine protected areas, Canada is playing catch-up, and the best parts of this bill will help us get there. The problem is, in the rush to meet our international commitments, this government has prioritized quantity over quality of the areas protected. This is a big mistake. Most Canadian MPAs are not meeting international conservation standards, and this bill does nothing to address this deficiency. It fails to set minimum protection standards and targets for zoning of marine protected areas, which renders the designation inconsistent at best and meaningless at worst. It goes without saying that ecological integrity should be the foremost priority of an MPA management. However, due to a lack of minimum protection standards, at this point, Canada's MPAs offer an insufficient level of protection of sensitive ecosystems. In their report, linking science and law minimum protection standards for Canada's marine protected areas, West Coast Environmental Law states that ecological integrity should be a top priority for MPAs. The report says, quote, decisions on activities permitted within marine protected areas should be required to prioritize maintenance of the protected ecosystems, processes, and functions. The Canada National Parks Act, CNPA, and associated regulations require the prioritization of the maintenance of or restoration of ecological integrity to decisions on allowable activities. The National Parks Policy elaborates this in principle, stating that, quote, national park ecosystems will be given the highest degree of protection to ensure the perpetuation of natural environments essentially unaltered by human activity, and that human activities within a national park that threaten the integrity of park ecosystems will not be permitted. The CNPA also gives the Minister the power to designate wilderness areas in any area of a park that exists in a natural state or that is capable of returning to a natural state. And when that designation is made, the Minister may not authorize any activity to be carried out in a wilderness area that is likely to impair the wilderness character of an area, including requirements to maintain ecological integrity of protected marine ecosystems within Canada's Ocean Act would ensure adherence to protection standards and thus link science to legal practice, end quote. Madam Speaker, a concern that we are hearing more and more about is ocean plastics and marine debris. We firmly believe that this government needs to implement a strategy and fund programs that will preserve the ecological integrity of our MPAs from this growing hazard. Some current and proposed MPAs allow harmful activities like oil and gas exploration and extraction, mining exploration, industrial fishing, including bottom trawling. Banning these activities from protected areas should be the obvious choice. When we compare MPAs to the protections offered to terrestrial parks, it becomes even more striking. In the words of World Wildlife Fund President David Miller, quote, "Oil and gas extraction is not compatible with conservation and should never be permitted inside a protected area. National parks on land have long had this in place as a minimum standard. It seems outrageous that a marine area could be designated as protected and yet oil and gas platform could be placed in there. But that's exactly what's going to be allowed in the Laurentian Channel unless the Government of Canada changes course." End quote. Or sorry, there's more. The Channel is a critical migration route for some of our most endangered whales, and oil and gas exploration and extraction threatens them with noise pollution, habitat disturbance, and physical injury from seismic blasting. Now, end quote. This situation is an appalling double standard. We wouldn't allow oil and gas exploration in a national park on land, so why would we allow it in a protected area in our oceans? The answer to this problem is clear. A strong set of protection standards in line with the International Union of the Conservation of Nature and legislated protection targets should be adopted by the government in order to meet our international commitments. This is exactly what 59 scientists from across the world requested in an open letter to the Fisheries and Oceans Minister and the Environment and Climate Change Minister. The letter stressed that scientific studies have shown repeatedly that stricter protection provides greater biodiversity benefits. They argue, at minimum, we should ban the most damaging activities to marine biodiversity, such as oil and gas activity, undersea mining, ocean waste dumping, and industrial-scale fishing. Marine protected areas are home to countless at-risk species, and by definition, those ecosystems are in great need of protection. Mr. Speaker, this is important. We cannot allow a lack of legal rigor and haste to prevent us from accomplishing the goal that we have to agree to. The government has made much of its commitment to science-based public policy, but with Bill C-55, again, has chosen to ignore the best available conservation science. This Liberal government should listen to the scientists within the scientific community and not let this bill be another broken promise to Canadians. Unfortunately, the government's environmental record is a string of broken promises and unfulfilled campaign commitments. It begins with the stunning approval of the Kinder Morgan pipeline with the promised review of public consultation and environmental assessment. The people of British Columbia did not vote for a 7-fold increase in the number of oil tankers in Vancouver Harbour, and they certainly did not vote for the accompanying risk of an oil spill that would devastate our coast. It continues with no action on their promise to restore essential environmental protection legislation. On the campaign trail, Liberals promised to restore the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, and the Navigable Waters Protection Act. While we wait, they have approved the construction of the now-defunct Pacific Northwest LNG terminal on critical salmon spawning grounds and cleared the way for development of the Site C Dam under the weakened legislation. The Liberal record of saying one thing and doing another is why we should all be concerned that this bill gives the minister far too much latitude to decide what activities are permissible in an MPA. Ministerial discretion has become a red flag for Canadians. Too often, this government has promised one thing in regards to environmental protection and climate change while using ministerial discretion to accomplish the exact opposite. Recently, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans made an exemption to the Fisheries Act to allow one of the potentially most destructive projects on the planet to move forward, the KSM mine in British Columbia. KSM will be the largest open pit mine in North America. Building this mine will require destruction of upper tributaries of the North Treaty and South Teagan Creeks, which flow into the salmon-bearing Nass and Belle Irving rivers, for tailings storage. Alarmingly, KSM will store more than 27 times the amount of tailings stored at the Mount Polley mine, using the same technology that failed 3 years ago. Madam Speaker, we need clear legislation with strong guidelines to constrain ministerial discretion. These powers should be used to forward the ecological integrity of a marine protected area rather than permitting harmful activities. Recent research shows MPAs that permit harmful activities are less effective at achieving biodiversity than those with large no-take zones, where extractive activity is banned. Dr. Susanna Fuller from the Ecological Action Centre believes MPA's core no-take zones should encompass 75% of a given MPA. Madam Speaker, Canada is nowhere close to reaching that high bar. Right now, the Minister has the discretion to determine what activities are allowed in an MPA and how restrictive each zone in an MPA can be. So far, Canada's Federal Fisheries Minister has implemented a no-take zone in only 5 MPAs to date, and those areas are tiny in comparison to the overall MPA. Canada should follow international examples and make no-take zones the rule rather than the exception in MPAs. Madam Speaker, I'd like to talk for a moment about opportunities for co-governance of MPAs between Indigenous nations and the Crown in Canada. West Coast Environmental Law has published a paper entitled An Ocean of Opportunity, Co-Governance in Marine Protected Areas in Canada. And it states, quote, Indigenous peoples have been governing marine territories using their own legal traditions since time immemorial. For the most part, Indigenous legal orders have not been recognized or upheld in the governance of marine protected areas in Canada. The current Government of Canada has committed to a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples, based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Co-governance arrangements in MPAs are one way of achieving a true nation-to-nation or Inuit-to-Crown relationship by creating space for the healthy interaction of Canadian and Indigenous laws. With the Government of Canada's renewed commitment to protect at least 10% of Canada's oceans by 2020, there is a unique opportunity to implement co-governance arrangements in both new and established MPAs." End quote. Madam Speaker, the report states that Canada has an opportunity to become a world leader in recognizing and implementing meaningful co-governance in MPA law, and I agree. In closing, Canada's New Democrats understand there is no one-size-fits-all solution to marine protected areas, and we recognize different MPAs are going to require different types of protections. Canada is large and geographically diverse. Local context must be taken into account. While uniform standards may not make sense for all coasts, minimum protection standards absolutely do. And that is what is missing from this bill. Madam Speaker, the government needs to listen to scientists, First Nations, working fishers, the provinces and territories, and concerned Canadians so we make the necessary improvements to Bill C-55. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable